Which one? 2 words. That is what she said when detectives knocked on her door. They told her they needed to talk about her ex-husband. And she looked them dead in the eyes and said, "Which one?" This is the story of Susan Avalon. And what those 2 words revealed will shock you. Before we continue, make sure you like, share, subscribe to Crime Case Voices, and turn on notifications so you never miss a case. It helps more people find this channel and hear these cases that need to be told. Now let's get into it. December 17th, 2025. A Wednesday afternoon in Florida. The kind of day that should have been unremarkable. Kids coming home from school. Parents pulling into driveways. Christmas just 8 days away. Holiday decorations on every lawn. Inflatable Santas swaying in the warm Florida breeze. Strings of lights waiting to be turned on when darkness fell. The holiday season was in full swing. Families were making plans. Shopping for presents. Wrapping gifts. Counting down the days until Christmas morning. In the Heritage Harbor neighborhood of Bradenton, people were thinking about holiday dinners and family gatherings and the joy that comes with this time of year. No one was thinking about murder. No one was thinking about a silver Honda Odyssey driving down from Citrus County with death behind the wheel. No one was thinking about a woman with a gun and a stolen bag of Panera food and a list of ex-husbands she intended to eliminate. It was supposed to be an ordinary day in an ordinary neighborhood. Instead, it became the day Susan Erica Avalon allegedly committed one of the most calculated, brazen, and cold-blooded double murders in Florida history. At approximately 2:55 p.m., deputies from the Manatee County Sheriff's Office received a frantic call about a shooting in the Heritage Harbor neighborhood of Bradenton. This was not the kind of neighborhood where shootings happened. Heritage Harbor is a quiet, upscale residential community about 50 miles south of Tampa. Nice homes with manicured lawns. Families with children. People who walk their dogs every morning and wave to their neighbors. Not the kind of place where people get shot at their front doors in broad daylight. This was a community where neighbors knew each other, where people felt safe leaving their doors unlocked, where children played in front yards and families gathered for barbecues on weekends. Crime happened in other places, in other neighborhoods, in other parts of Florida. Not here, not Heritage Harbor, not on a Wednesday afternoon with Christmas just around the corner. But crime does not respect boundaries. Evil does not stop at neighborhood lines. And on December 17th, 2025, violence came to Chatham Light Run in the most brutal way imaginable. When deputies arrived at the 7,000 block of Chatham Light Run, they found a scene that would haunt them for years to come. A 54-year-old man was lying on the ground near his front door, bleeding from 2 gunshot wounds. One bullet had struck him in the abdomen. The second had also found its mark, tearing through his body. He was still alive, barely, clinging to life by a thread, his blood pooling on the concrete, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Paramedics worked frantically to stabilize him. They loaded him into an ambulance and rushed him toward the nearest hospital. Sirens wailing, lights flashing, every second counting. Meanwhile, deputies secured the crime scene and began interviewing witnesses. But before the victim was transported, he managed to speak. Despite the pain, despite the shock, despite the life draining out of his body, he was conscious enough to answer the most important question in any homicide investigation. Who did this to you? The deputies leaned in close. They needed a name, a description, anything that could point them toward the person who had just tried to end this man's life. His answer would crack the case wide open. Possibly my ex-wife, he said. Those 3 words changed everything. In a flash, this was no longer a random act of violence. This was not a robbery gone wrong. This was not a stranger with a gun. This was personal. This was targeted. This was someone the victim knew intimately, his ex-wife. The victim was rushed to a local hospital. Doctors worked desperately to save his life, performing emergency surgery, transfusing blood, doing everything modern medicine could do to repair the damage those bullets had caused. But it was not enough. 5 hours after the shooting, at approximately 8 p.m. on Wednesday evening, the 54-year-old man died from his injuries. He took his last breath in a hospital bed, surrounded by the sterile hum of machines, far from the home where he had been shot down like an animal. His name has been withheld under Massey's Law, Florida's constitutional amendment protecting crime victims and their families from having their identities publicly released. But what we know about this man paints a picture of someone who did not deserve to die this way. He was a good man, a kind neighbor, a father who loved his children, someone who walked to the town park every morning and said hello to everyone he passed, someone who had 2 dogs and a family that adored him. He had a teenage daughter who was about to have her entire world shattered into a million pieces, because that 15-year-old girl was inside the house when her father was shot. She was home, just feet away from where her father opened the door and met a hail of bullets. She did not see the shooting, but she heard it. 3 shots fired. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of gunfire echoing through the walls of her own home. The sound of her father's life being stolen. Terrified, the teenager looked out the window. She saw a figure in a gray sweatshirt and a surgical mask getting into a silver Honda Odyssey minivan. The vehicle pulled away from the curb and disappeared down the street, leaving behind nothing but the acrid smell of gunpowder and the screams of a daughter who had just heard her father die. The teenager called for help. Despite her terror, despite her shock, despite the fact that her entire world had just collapsed, she managed to give deputies every detail she could remember. The gray sweatshirt, the surgical mask, the silver Honda Odyssey minivan. She had no idea that the person who had just shot her father was also her mother. Her biological mother, Susan Avalon. Deputies ran the information through their system. They began checking license plate readers across the region, surveillance cameras at gas stations and intersections, traffic patterns and toll booth records, and they found something deeply disturbing. A silver Honda Odyssey matching the description had been tracked by license plate readers traveling a very specific route that day. The technology that monitors vehicles across Florida's highways had captured Susan Avalon's movements in stunning detail. The vehicle had come from Citrus County, about 80 miles north of Bradenton. It had traveled south through Hillsborough County past Tampa. It had crossed the Sunshine Skyway Bridge, the iconic cable-stayed bridge that spans Tampa Bay, its distinctive yellow cables rising against the Florida sky. The Sunshine Skyway is one of the most recognizable landmarks in Florida. Tourists photograph it. Locals drive it every day. And on December 17, 2025, a silver Honda Odyssey carrying a woman who had just committed murder crossed that bridge on her way to commit another. The license plate readers captured her going south, toward Bradenton, toward her first ex-husband's home, toward the Heritage Harbor neighborhood where children were walking home from school and neighbors were pulling into their driveways. After the shooting, the same vehicle was tracked heading back north, back across the Skyway, back toward Citrus County, back toward the home where Susan Avalon would try to wash away the evidence in a shower with her clothes still on. Someone had driven over 100 miles to commit this murder, and they had not been subtle about it. The detectives looked at the data in front of them. The license plate readers had captured the vehicle multiple times, coming and going, before the murder and after. There was no attempt to take back roads or avoid cameras, no effort to swap plates or use a different car. Either this killer was extremely confident or extremely stupid, or maybe both. What the detectives did not know yet was that the Bradenton shooting was only half the story. They were about to discover that before Susan Avalon came to Heritage Harbor. She had already committed murder once that day. There was another body waiting to be found, and Susan Avalon herself was about to give it away. Detectives began piecing together the killer's movements hour by hour, minute by minute. Before the shooting, surveillance cameras at a Panera Bread restaurant captured something suspicious. The restaurant was located about 1.5 miles from the victim's home, a convenient stopping point for someone planning violence. The footage showed a woman entering the restaurant. She did not go to the counter to order. She did not pull out her phone to check a mobile order. She did not wait in line or speak to any employees. Instead, she walked straight to the delivery pickup shelf. This is the area in restaurants where online orders wait for delivery drivers to collect them. DoorDash, Uber Eats, Grubhub. Food that belongs to customers who are waiting at home. The woman grabbed a bag of food that did not belong to her. and she walked out. No one stopped her. No one questioned her. She moved with purpose, with confidence, like someone who had done this before or had at least planned it out in advance. Detectives realized immediately what had happened. The killer had stolen someone else's food delivery. Not because she was hungry, not because she was poor, but because she needed a prop, a disguise, a cover story. She was going to pose as a delivery driver. Think about it from the victim's perspective. He is home on a Wednesday afternoon. His teenage daughter is there. The doorbell rings or someone knocks. He opens the door expecting a food delivery. Maybe he ordered something. Maybe he thinks it is a surprise from a friend. Maybe he just assumes it is a harmless delivery person doing their job. He opens the door, and bullets start flying. There is no conversation, no argument, no chance to realize what is happening. The moment the door swings open, death arrives. This is how calculated killers operate. They do not give their victims a chance to fight back or run or call for help. They strike fast, strike hard, and disappear before anyone can process what has happened. Susan Avalon knew exactly what she was doing. She had planned this moment. She had rehearsed it in her mind. She had driven over 100 miles to make it happen. And now she was executing her plan with cold precision. The surveillance video from Panera Bread showed the woman clearly. She was wearing a gray sweatshirt, the same gray sweatshirt the victim's daughter had described seeing through the window. The same gray sweatshirt that would become the key piece of evidence linking Susan Avalon to this murder. From Panera Bread, the woman drove to the victim's home in the Heritage Harbor neighborhood. She parked on the street. She walked up to the front door carrying the stolen food like any ordinary delivery driver. It was 3 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon. Broad daylight. The sun was shining. Kids were coming home from school. Neighbors were walking their dogs. Cars were pulling into driveways. Any number of people could have seen her. Any number of witnesses could have watched her approach that front door. She was exposed, visible, completely out in the open. It doesn't get any more brazen than this, Sheriff Wells later told reporters. This is a very active neighborhood. 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday. Kids coming home from school. A lot of activity, as you can imagine. He paused, shaking his head in disbelief. She didn't seem to care. She did not care about witnesses. She did not care about cameras. She did not care about the teenage daughter inside the house or the neighbors who might look out their windows or the school buses dropping off children just blocks away. Susan Avalon had come to kill, and nothing was going to stop her. When the victim opened his front door, expecting a food delivery, the woman started firing immediately. No hesitation, no warning, no chance for him to react, no opportunity for him to run or fight back or call for help. The moment the door swung open, she raised her weapon and pulled the trigger. When this victim opens the door, suspect starts to fire immediately, a Manatee County Sheriff's Office spokesperson later said during a press conference. It doesn't get any more brazen than this. The sheriff called the crime targeted, premeditated, calculated. Those are not words law enforcement uses lightly. Those are words that describe a killer who planned every step, who thought through every detail, who left nothing to chance. This was not a crime of passion. This was not a spontaneous act of violence driven by sudden rage. This was not a fight that got out of control or an argument that escalated beyond anyone's intentions. This was a woman who had driven over 100 miles, stolen food as a cover story, put on a surgical mask to hide her identity, and executed a man at his own front door while his teenage daughter was inside the house. This was murder in the first degree, planned, methodical, cold-blooded, but detectives still did not know the full scope of what had happened that day. They did not know that before Susan Avalon came to Bradenton, she had already killed once. They did not know there was another body. They would not find out until she opened her mouth and asked a question that would expose everything. The question that would seal her fate. 2 simple words that would unravel everything she had tried to hide. Which one? As we continue, like, share, subscribe and turn on notification. She was destroying evidence. Right there, in plain sight, in broad daylight, as deputies pulled up to question her about a murder that had happened just hours earlier. If there was any doubt about Susan Avalon's involvement in the Bradenton shooting, that doubt evaporated the moment detectives saw the bleach in her hands. Innocent people do not race home after a shooting and start scrubbing their vehicles with industrial cleaning products. Innocent people do not try to erase every trace of DNA, every drop of blood, every fiber of evidence that might connect them to a crime. Only guilty people do that. Only people who know exactly what they have done and are desperately trying to hide it. Only people who understand that their vehicle contains evidence of murder. Only people who have blood on their hands and need to wash it off before anyone notices. The deputies approached Susan Avalon carefully. They identified themselves as detectives from the Manatee County Sheriff's Office. They told her they needed to speak with her about her ex-husband. And that is when she said it. Which one? 2 words. 2 simple words that changed absolutely everything about this investigation. The detectives looked at each other. They had come to question Susan Avalon about the Bradenton shooting, about the 54-year-old man who had died at the hospital just hours earlier, about the father whose teenage daughter had watched a gray sweatshirt and a minivan flee the scene. That was the only crime they knew about. But Susan Avalon seemed to think they were there about a different ex-husband entirely, which one implied there was more than one ex-husband she had reason to worry about. Which one implied she had done something to multiple people. Which one implied this investigation was about to get much, much bigger. We start to dig into the second ex-husband that we know nothing about, Manatee County Sheriff Rick Wells later explained during a press conference. And we find that she was married again after she was married to our victim, and this ex-husband lives in Tampa. Susan Avalon had been married twice in her life. And apparently she seemed to think the detectives might be asking about either one of them. She has got beef with both these ex-husbands, Sheriff Wells said. According to investigators, Avalon initially confused the Manatee County detectives for officials from the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. She thought they were there about Tampa, about her other ex-husband, about a crime they did not even know had been committed yet. She gave herself away completely. We only know of one, Sheriff Wells later explained. We only came there to ask about the Bradenton victim. We had no idea there was another body. But Susan Avalon's reaction told them everything they needed to know. She started making comments about her ex-husband. The sheriff said that he was a child abuser, a molester, just talking about all these problems she had with this ex-husband. And then something strange happened. She thought we were there from Hillsborough County, Wells continued. She thought my detectives were Hillsborough County detectives. We were trying to figure out what she was talking about. Susan Avalon was so confused about which murder the police had discovered that she assumed they were from Tampa. She assumed they had found the body of her second ex-husband first. She had killed 2 men that day, and she could not keep track of which jurisdiction had caught up to her. If Susan Avalon had simply stayed calm, if she had asked what this was about before answering, if she had said nothing at all, detectives might have needed weeks to uncover the second murder. They might have never connected the 2 cases. But she could not help herself. Which one? Immediately, the Manatee County Sheriff's Office contacted the Tampa Police Department. They explained what Susan Avalon had said. They requested an immediate welfare check on her second ex-husband, a man who lived in the 1200 block of East Frierson Avenue in Tampa. Tampa officers drove to the residence. They knocked on the front door. No answer. They called out, identifying themselves as police. No response. They walked around the property, checking windows and looking for any signs of life inside. And they found something disturbing. The rear door showed signs of damage. Someone had forced their way into this home. The door frame was splintered. The lock was broken. This was not normal wear and tear. This was evidence of a violent entry. The officers drew their weapons and entered the home. Inside, they found a scene of horror. An adult male was lying on the floor, dead. Multiple gunshot wounds had torn through his body. Blood had pooled around him. He had been dead for hours, killed earlier that same day, long before the Bradenton shooting even occurred. The damage to the rear door told the story of how the killer had gained entry. This was not someone who knocked on the front door with stolen Panera food. This was not a ruse or a disguise. This was brute force. Susan Avalon had gone around back. She had broken through the door. She had entered his home like an invader, like an assassin, like someone who knew her victim would not willingly let her inside. And then she had killed him. Multiple gunshot wounds. No mercy. No hesitation. No chance for him to defend himself or call for help. Susan Avalon had killed her second ex-husband first. In Tampa, earlier that same day, she had forced her way into his home through the back door and shot him to death. Then she had gotten back in her Honda Odyssey and driven across the Sunshine Skyway Bridge to Bradenton. She had stopped at a Panera Bread, stolen food from the delivery shelf, put on a surgical mask, and driven to Heritage Harbor to kill her first ex-husband second. 2 murders. 1 day. 2 counties. 2 men who had once shared her life. 2 men who had once loved her, married her, had children with her. Both dead before sunset. And Susan Avalon had done it all before dinner. The timeline was staggering. In a span of just a few hours, Susan Avalon had driven from her home in Citrus County to Tampa, killed her second ex-husband, driven across Tampa Bay to Bradenton, stopped for stolen food at Panera, killed her first ex-husband, and driven all the way back home to Citrus County. She had traveled hundreds of miles, committed 2 separate homicides in 2 separate jurisdictions, left bodies in 2 different cities, and made it home in time to take a shower and make derogatory comments about the men she had just murdered. This was not a crime of passion. This was a military operation, a carefully planned, meticulously executed campaign of vengeance that required forethought, logistics, and a complete absence of conscience. The question now was why? Why December 17th, 2025? Why that particular Wednesday just 8 days before Christmas? Why not wait until after the holidays, when families would be less focused on celebrations and more distracted by the return to normal life? Why both of them on the same day? Why not space out the murders, reduce the chances of being caught, make it harder for investigators to connect the dots? What pushed Susan Avalon from bitter divorced woman to calculated double murderer? What snapped inside her mind that made her decide today was the day both men needed to die? The answers lay in the years of conflict that preceded that Wednesday afternoon. Armed with surveillance footage, license plate reader data, and a dying man's final words, detectives tracked the silver Honda Odyssey to a residence in Citrus County, Florida. The address belonged to Susan Erica Avalon. Citrus County is located on Florida's Gulf Coast, about 80 miles north of Bradenton. It is a largely rural area, known for its manatees and natural springs. Susan Avalon lived there with her live-in boyfriend in what appeared to be a quiet, ordinary home. But when Manatee County deputies arrived at her property, they found something that immediately raised every red flag in the book. Susan Avalon was outside her home, in her driveway, standing next to her silver Honda Odyssey minivan, and she was wiping down the interior of the vehicle with bleach and cleaning rags. Who was Susan Erica Avalon? What kind of person wakes up one morning and decides today is the day I kill both of my ex-husbands? Susan Avalon was 51 years old at the time of the murders. She lived in Citrus County, Florida, with her live-in boyfriend. A new relationship, a new chapter of her life. But the old chapters had never really closed. She had been married twice. Both marriages had ended in divorce. And both divorces had been ugly, bitter, drawn-out affairs filled with accusations, court battles, and seething resentment. The first marriage had produced children and lasted for years. According to court records obtained by investigators, Avalon and the Bradenton victim had been married for 11 years before their divorce. 11 years of building a life together. 11 years of raising children. 11 years of promises and vows and shared experiences. And then it all fell apart. The divorce had been finalized approximately 11 years before December 2025. That means Susan Avalon had spent roughly the same amount of time being divorced from this man as she had spent being married to him. But the fighting had never stopped. 11 years after their marriage ended, they were still locked in combat over custody of their children. They were still battling over child support payments, They were still appearing in courtrooms, filing motions, making accusations. Divorce is supposed to be an ending. For Susan Avalon and her first ex-husband, it was just the beginning of a new war. At the time of his death, Susan Avalon owed the Bradenton victim approximately $4,000 in back child support. This was not pocket change. This was money she was legally obligated to pay for the care and support of their children. Money she had not paid, and there was a deadline approaching. If Susan Avalon did not pay at least $200 by mid-December 2025, she would face consequences. Her driver's license would be suspended. A small punishment in the grand scheme of things, but perhaps enough to trigger something in a mind already consumed by resentment. December 17th was just days before that deadline. $4,000 is not a fortune. It is not the kind of money that should drive someone to murder. Plenty of people owe more than that in child support and never think about killing their ex-spouse. But for Susan Avalon, it may have been the final straw. The last indignity in a long line of indignities. The thing that pushed her over an edge she had been approaching for years. Or maybe the money had nothing to do with it at all. Maybe December 17th was simply the day she decided she had had enough. The day her hatred boiled over. The day she stopped fantasizing about revenge and started planning it. Was it the money that pushed her over the edge? The prospect of losing her license? The accumulating pressure of years of court battles and custody fights? Or was it something deeper, something darker, something that had been building inside Susan Avalon for years, waiting for the right moment to explode? Her live-in boyfriend later told detectives about the days leading up to the murders. His testimony provides a chilling glimpse into the mind of a killer in the hours before she struck. He said Avalon had recently been researching the Bradenton victim's address. She had tracked down where he lived, located his home, studied the area. She was not planning a friendly visit. She was planning an execution. The day before the shootings, December 16th, Susan Avalon said something to her boyfriend that would later haunt investigators. She told him she loved him, in case something happens to her. The boyfriend thought it was strange. Her behavior seemed out of character. Something about her demeanor was different, off, unsettling. But he did not press her on it. He did not ask what she meant. He had no idea what she was planning. In case something happens to her. Those words suggest Susan Avalon knew she might not come back. She knew what she was about to do was dangerous. She knew there was a chance she would be caught, killed, or imprisoned for the rest of her life. And she did it anyway. On the morning of December 17th, 2025, Susan Avalon kissed her boyfriend goodbye, got into her silver Honda Odyssey minivan, and drove south. First, she went to Tampa, to the 1200 block of East Frierson Avenue, to the home of her second ex-husband, the man she had married after her first marriage ended, the man she had divorced, the man she apparently hated just as much as the first. She did not knock on the front door. She went around back. She forced her way through the rear door, breaking the lock, splintering the frame. She entered his home like a burglar, like a predator, like someone who had no intention of leaving witnesses. She found him inside. She raised her weapon. She fired. Multiple gunshot wounds. Her second ex-husband died inside his own home, killed by the woman he had once promised to love and cherish until death do they part. Death had done them part, just not the way anyone expected. Then Susan Avalon got back in her minivan. She drove south, across the Sunshine Skyway Bridge, that beautiful iconic span that stretches across Tampa Bay, past the toll booths and the fishing piers and the tourists taking photographs. She had just committed murder, and she was driving calmly to commit another. She stopped at a Panera Bread, walked inside, stole food from the delivery shelf, put on a surgical mask, and drove to the Heritage Harbor neighborhood, where she killed her first ex-husband in broad daylight, in front of witnesses, with his daughter inside the house. And then she drove home. When Susan Avalon arrived back at her Citrus County residence that evening, she did not tell her boyfriend what she had done. She did not confess. She did not break down crying. She did not show any sign of remorse or guilt or even nervousness. She got in the shower, fully clothed, The boyfriend later told detectives exactly what he witnessed. She came home still wearing the gray sweatshirt. The same sweatshirt from the surveillance footage. The same sweatshirt the teenage daughter had described to deputies. The same sweatshirt that had been captured on camera at Panera Bread. And she got right in the shower with her clothes on. She did not take off the sweatshirt. She did not change into pajamas. She did not act like someone who had just run errands or visited friends. She stepped into the shower fully dressed and let the water run over her. Was she washing off blood? Gunpowder residue? The smell of death? The evidence of 2 murders committed in a single afternoon? Her boyfriend must have thought it was strange. Who gets in the shower fully clothed? Who does not take off their jacket and pants before stepping under the water? What kind of person behaves that way? But he said nothing. He did not ask questions. He did not call the police. She made derogatory comments about both ex-husbands that night. According to investigators, she talked about them with contempt, with anger, with disgust. She did not say she had killed them, but she made it clear she hated them. Both of them. She had just taken 2 lives. And she was washing off the evidence like she was rinsing away a bad day at work. The boyfriend did not call police. He did not suspect anything was wrong. He had no idea that the woman he lived with had just committed double murder. He thought she was just having a strange night. It would take detectives showing up at their door the next day for him to realize what had really happened. It would take those 2 words, which one, for everyone to understand that Susan Avalon had killed not 1 man but 2. And by then it was too late. The bodies had been found. The evidence had been collected. The license plate readers had told their story. And Susan Avalon was about to face justice for what she had done. But to truly understand who Susan Avalon was, investigators had to look backward. Into her past. Into her history with law enforcement. Into the pattern of behavior that had been building for decades. What they found was disturbing. As we continue, like, share, subscribe and turn on notification. Susan Avalon's past was not clean. Long before December 17, 2025, long before the double murder that would make national headlines, Susan Avalon had crossed paths with law enforcement multiple times. Records show she had been arrested before, in multiple states, across multiple jurisdictions, and the charges all shared a disturbing common theme: child abuse. In 2004, more than 20 years before the murders, Susan Avalon was arrested on a child abuse charge in the state of Virginia. The details of that case have not been publicly released. Court records from that era are difficult to access. But the arrest itself tells us something important about who Susan Avalon was. She had a history of violence. A history of harming those who were supposed to be in her care. A history that should have been a warning to everyone who came into her life afterward. But Susan Avalon did not stop in Virginia. There were also child abuse cases filed against her in Tampa, Florida. In Pasco County, Florida. Multiple allegations across multiple jurisdictions. Multiple times when authorities believed she had harmed children badly enough to warrant criminal charges. Those cases were eventually dropped, dismissed, filed away and forgotten. But investigators say the pattern is clear. All of those child abuse cases were tied to custody disputes with her ex-husbands. The same ex-husbands she would later be accused of murdering. Susan Avalon used accusations as weapons. When she was fighting her ex-husbands in court, when she was battling for custody of their children, she made claims, filed complaints, tried to paint the men as abusers and monsters. And when detectives questioned her at her Citrus County home on December 17th, she continued that pattern even as the walls closed in around her. She called the Bradenton victim a child abuser, a molester. She made accusations against a dead man who could no longer defend himself. There is no evidence to support these accusations. No charges were ever filed against the victim. No convictions appear in his record. Nothing in any public document suggests he was anything other than what his neighbors described. A nice man, a good father, a gentle soul who walked his dogs every morning and said hello to everyone he passed. But Susan Avalon apparently saw him differently. She saw both of her ex-husbands as enemies, as threats. as people who had wronged her, hurt her, stood in her way, people who needed to be eliminated. Between both marriages, Susan Avalon had approximately 5 children. 5 children who shared DNA with the 2 men she had just killed. 5 children who now had to process the unthinkable reality that their mother had allegedly murdered their fathers. 5 children. Think about that number. 5 young people whose lives have been destroyed by what happened on December 17, 2025. 5 kids who will grow up without their fathers. 5 human beings who will spend the rest of their lives trying to understand how their mother could do something so evil. Some of these children are adults now. Some are teenagers. Some may be younger. But all of them share the same burden. Their mother killed their father. In some cases, their mother killed their stepfather too. How do you explain that to a child? How do you tell a kid that mommy killed daddy? How do you help a teenager understand that the woman who gave them life took the life of the man who helped create them? These are questions that psychologists and social workers and family members will be grappling with for years to come. The trauma Susan Avalon inflicted did not end with the bullets. It will echo through generations. The 15-year-old daughter who heard the gunshots that killed her father in Bradenton. The other children from both marriages who are now orphaned or left with one parent in prison facing the death penalty. All because Susan Avalon could not let go of her hatred. We do not know why yesterday was the day she decided to take this action. Sheriff Rick Wells admitted during his press conference. Nobody knows what pushed Susan Avalon over the edge on December 17, 2025. Was it the money? The $4,000 in back child support she could not or would not pay? Was it the looming deadline? The threat of losing her driver's license if she did not make a payment? Was it years of accumulated bitterness? Decades of court battles and custody fights and accusations flying in both directions? Or was it something inside her that had always been there? A darkness that had been waiting to emerge since she was arrested for child abuse in Virginia back in 2004? We may never know the full truth. What we know is that Susan Avalon made a choice. She planned these murders in advance. She tracked down addresses. She told her boyfriend she loved him in case something happened. She got in her minivan and drove to Tampa, and she pulled the trigger, twice, on 2 different men, in 2 different cities, on the same Wednesday in December. The history was there for anyone who wanted to see it. The arrests, the accusations, the custody battles, the child support disputes, the years of conflict that never seemed to end. Susan Avalon had been building toward this moment for a long time. The question was whether anyone could have stopped her before she reached the breaking point. The answer, tragically, was probably not. The system had failed. The warning signs had been ignored. And now 2 men were dead. What came next was the slow, grinding process of justice. Susan Avalon was taken into custody by Manatee County Sheriff's Office detectives on the night of December 17, 2025. The arrest happened at her Citrus County home, the same home where detectives had watched her wiping down her minivan with bleach, the same home where she had asked which ex-husband they wanted to talk about, the same home where she had returned after killing 2 men and gotten in the shower fully clothed. She was handcuffed and transported to the Citrus County Jail, booked on an out-of-county warrant from Manatee County, held without bond. The initial charge was second-degree murder for the killing in Bradenton. But that was just the beginning. On December 23, 2025, Susan Avalon appeared before Circuit Court Judge Frederick Mercurio. She stood in the courtroom, facing the judge, knowing the walls were closing in around her. Ms. Avalon, you are here for a warrant that was issued for the charge of second-degree murder, Judge Mercurio said. Another judge has already determined that probable cause exists for your arrest. Avalon asked if her attorney was present. She told the court she had spoken with 2 lawyers earlier who said they would attend the hearing. But no private attorney appeared on her behalf. Judge Mercurio informed her that a public defender would be appointed if she qualified financially. The judge issued an order holding Avalon without release until a pretrial detention hearing scheduled for January 2, 2026. No bail, no bond, no possibility of walking out of that courtroom a free woman. But prosecutors made it clear from the very beginning that they were not going to stop there. This was not going to be a simple murder case with a simple resolution. This was going to be a capital case. Manatee County Sheriff Rick Wells stood before the cameras the day after the murders and made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the community. His office would be working with the state attorney to seek first-degree murder charges against Susan Avalon. And more than that, they would be seeking the death penalty. "We believe this was premeditated," Sheriff Wells declared. "She knew what she was doing. It was planned. And she came here to kill her ex-husband." Those words hung in the air. Premeditated. Planned. She knew what she was doing. This was not a woman who snapped. This was not a crime of passion. This was cold, calculated, first-degree murder. The sheriff's office announced they would be working with the state attorney to convene a grand jury. They would seek to upgrade the charges from second-degree to first-degree murder. They would pursue the maximum penalty the law allows: death. "This is bizarre," Sheriff Wells said, shaking his head as he addressed reporters. "This is not something you would expect." He said it was the first case of its kind he had ever seen in his entire law enforcement career. A woman killing not one, but two ex-husbands. On the same day, in two different counties, in broad daylight, with witnesses everywhere. "Nothing like this," he said. "Nothing that is really domestic in nature, where a husband or wife decides they want to end the life of someone they once loved. Nothing like this. Domestic violence murders happen every day in America. Husbands kill wives. Wives kill husbands. Former partners stalk and attack and murder each other with depressing regularity. But to kill two ex-spouses on the same day, to drive across counties committing murders, to plan it so carefully and execute it so brazenly, that was something else entirely." The Tampa Police Department launched a separate investigation into the killing of Avalon's second ex-husband, the man who had been found dead inside his home on East Frierson Avenue, the man who had been shot multiple times, the man who had been killed first, before Susan Avalon drove to Bradenton to claim her second victim. Tampa police are working with the state attorney's office of the 13th Judicial Circuit to determine what charges will be filed in their jurisdiction. Another investigation, another jurisdiction, another set of charges. Susan Avalon could face the death penalty twice, and she has not said a word. Since her arrest, she has remained largely silent. She has not provided a statement to investigators. She has not explained why she did it. She has not offered any justification, any excuse, any expression of remorse. When she spoke to detectives initially, she made accusations against her dead ex-husband, called him an abuser, a molester, tried to play the victim even as the evidence mounted against her. But she has not confessed. She has not apologized. She has not acknowledged what she did. The murder weapon has not been found. Detectives believe Susan Avalon disposed of the gun somewhere between the crime scenes and her home in Citrus County. They have been searching, checking dumpsters and drainage ditches and empty lots along the route she traveled. So far, nothing. Her silver Honda Odyssey has been seized as evidence. Forensic teams have been going through every inch of that vehicle, looking for blood, looking for DNA, looking for shell casings, looking for anything that can tie her definitively to both murders. The surveillance footage from Panera Bread, the license plate reader data, the dying words of the Bradenton victim, the forced entry at the Tampa home, the bleach and the rags. The evidence is piling up like a mountain. Susan Avalon thought she was clever. She thought she could drive to Tampa and kill one man, then drive to Bradenton and kill another, then drive home and wash away the evidence. She was wrong. The web of evidence was too tight. The surveillance cameras had captured too much. The license plate readers had logged every movement. The dying victim had named his killer with his final breaths. There was no escape for Susan Avalon. And the prosecution was just getting started. Sheriff Rick Wells made it clear that his office would pursue this case to the fullest extent of the law. He called it bizarre, unprecedented, the kind of case that makes hardened investigators shake their heads in disbelief. A woman killing two ex-husbands on the same day, in two separate locations, with a child in earshot of one of the shootings, using stolen food as a prop to gain access to her victim. This was not ordinary domestic violence. This was something far darker, and the families of the victims deserved to see justice done. Behind every murder statistic are real people, real lives, real families torn apart by violence. The Bradenton victim was 54 years old when Susan Avalon shot him at his front door. His name has been protected under Massey's Law, Florida's constitutional amendment that allows crime victims and their families to keep their identities private if they choose. But even without his name, we know who he was. His neighbors remember him vividly. They still cannot believe what happened on their quiet street. I met him about a year and a half ago. One neighbor named Ronald Andriano told local reporters after the murder made headlines. He walks every morning from his house down to our town park. Every morning when he is walking by, we say hello. The neighbor paused, overcome with emotion, the memories flooding back, the realization that he would never see his friend walking to the park again. We talked a little bit, he continued. He was such a nice man. His family, his daughters, his son, all nice. His 2 dogs. Just a very gentle, nice family. A gentle, nice family. The kind of family you want living next door. The kind of neighbor who makes a community feel safe. The kind of person who waves hello and asks how you are doing and remembers the names of your children. That is what Susan Avalon destroyed with a stolen bag of Panera bread and a gun. This was not a violent man. This was not someone who had done anything to deserve what happened to him. This was a father who walked to the park every morning. A neighbor who said hello to everyone. A dog owner who loved his pets. And he was murdered in cold blood because his ex-wife could not let go of her hatred. His 15-year-old daughter was home when her father was killed. She heard the shots. She ran to the window and saw a figure in a gray sweatshirt fleeing in a silver minivan. She called for help. She provided descriptions that would help crack the case. And then she learned that the person who killed her father was her own mother. I want you to understand how traumatized she is. Sheriff Rick Wells said about the teenager during his press conference. She has no idea what is going on, but she is able to give us this information. Think about that for a moment. A 15-year-old girl, in the midst of the worst day of her life, traumatized by what she had just witnessed, still managed to keep her wits about her, still managed to look out the window and observe details, still managed to tell deputies about the gray sweatshirt, the surgical mask, the minivan. She helped catch her own mother. That is something no 15-year-old should ever have to do. No child should have to provide evidence against their own parent. No teenager should have to watch their mother being led away in handcuffs for killing their father. But that is exactly what happened in this case. And that teenager will live with the weight of it forever. The teenager will carry this trauma for the rest of her life. Every Christmas will remind her of the Christmas that never came because her father was murdered 8 days before. Every birthday will be shadowed by the memory of the day she heard gunshots and saw her mother drive away. She lost her father to murder and her mother to prison in a single afternoon. The Tampa victim remains largely anonymous. His name has not been released. Details about his life have not been made public. He is a ghost in this story, a shadow, a man who died without anyone even knowing he was dead until hours later. But he was also somebody. He was someone's son, someone's brother, someone's friend, someone's father, someone's neighbor, someone who had a life and dreams and plans for the future. He was a man who made the mistake of marrying Susan Avalon. He and Susan Avalon had been married after her first marriage ended. They had met, fallen in love, exchanged vows. At some point, they believed they would spend their lives together. At some point, they trusted each other completely. And then the marriage fell apart. Another divorce. Another custody battle. Another round of accusations and court dates and bitter resentment. Whatever happened between them, whatever drove them apart, he did not deserve what came next. Instead, she shot him to death in his own home. Whatever disputes they had, whatever history of conflict existed between them, he did not deserve to die that way. No one deserves to be ambushed in their own home. No one deserves to have their back door kicked in and bullets fired into their body. These two men shared something besides Susan Avalon. They shared the experience of loving her, marrying her, having children with her. And they shared the experience of being executed by her. Two families are now grieving. 2 sets of children have lost their fathers. 2 communities are asking how this could have happened. And 1 woman sits in a jail cell, facing the possibility of death, saying nothing. The silence from Susan Avalon is deafening. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of the pain she has caused. She accused her dead ex-husband of being an abuser when she spoke to detectives. She tried to deflect blame even as she was being handcuffed. She showed no remorse, no guilt, no human emotion at all. The victims cannot speak for themselves. They are gone. Their voices were silenced by bullets on a Wednesday afternoon. But their families can speak. Their neighbors can speak. And the evidence speaks louder than any words ever could. Susan Avalon took 2 lives. She destroyed multiple families. She traumatized a teenage girl who had to hear her own father being murdered. And now she will face the consequences. Susan Avalon was extradited from Citrus County to Manatee County on Monday, December 23, 2025, 6 days after the murders. She appeared before a judge and was ordered held without bond. No bail. No possibility of paying her way to freedom. She would remain in the Manatee County Jail until her case worked its way through the court system. Her next court date was set for January 2, 2026. The wheels of justice were beginning to turn. Prosecutors in Manatee County have made their intentions crystal clear. They are not treating this as a simple murder case. They are not seeking a plea deal or a reduced charge or a negotiated sentence. They are seeking first-degree murder charges. And they are seeking the death penalty. If Susan Avalon is convicted and sentenced to death, she will join a long list of killers who have faced execution in the Sunshine State. Florida has not hesitated to carry out capital punishment. The state executed more prisoners in 2025 than in any previous year, setting records for the use of the death penalty. Susan Avalon could be next. Florida is not a state that hesitates when it comes to capital punishment. In 2025 alone, Florida executed more prisoners than any other state in the nation, setting a grim new record for the modern era. The death chamber in Stark, Florida, has been busy. If convicted and sentenced to death, Susan Avalon would eventually take that final walk. She would be strapped to a gurney. She would receive a lethal injection. And she would die for what she did on December 17, 2025. But that is a long way off. Death penalty cases take years, sometimes decades, to work through the appellate process. There will be motions and hearings and trials and appeals. Lawyers will argue every point. Judges will consider every argument. Justice moves slowly, but it moves. The Tampa Police Department is running a parallel investigation. They are building their own case for the murder of Avalon's second ex-husband, working with the state attorney's office of the 13th Judicial Circuit, gathering evidence, preparing charges. Susan Avalon could face 2 separate murder trials, 2 separate juries, 2 separate opportunities for the state to seek the ultimate punishment. She could be sentenced to death twice. The murder weapon remains missing. Detectives continue to search along the route Susan Avalon traveled that day. They are checking every dumpster, every drainage ditch, every vacant lot, every body of water where a gun might have been tossed. Finding that weapon would strengthen the case even further. Ballistics could tie the bullets to the gun. The gun could be tied to Susan Avalon. Every link in the chain makes the case harder to fight. But even without the weapon, the evidence is overwhelming. The surveillance footage, the license plate readers, the dying declaration of the Bradenton victim, the forced entry at the Tampa home, the bleach and the rags. Her own words. Which one? Those 2 words may ultimately seal her fate more than any physical evidence ever could. The 5 children from both marriages are now left to pick up the pieces. Some are adults. Some are teenagers. All of them are trying to process the fact that their mother allegedly murdered their fathers. There will be therapy sessions, support groups, nightmares and flashbacks, and years of trying to understand how the woman who gave them life could take the lives of the men who helped create them. Susan Avalon did not just kill 2 men. She destroyed multiple families across multiple generations. And now she sits in a jail cell in Manatee County, saying nothing, waiting for her day in court. The wait will be long. Death penalty cases are not resolved quickly. There will be hearings and motions and expert witnesses and legal arguments that stretch on for years. But justice will come. It may be slow, but it will come. The families of the victims are watching. The community is watching. The entire state of Florida is watching. Susan Avalon thought she could get away with murder. She thought she could kill 2 men and drive home like nothing happened. She thought she could wash off the blood and bleach away the evidence and go on with her life. She was wrong about everything, and now she will pay the price. The death penalty is on the table. Life in prison without parole is on the table. 2 separate trials in 2 separate jurisdictions are possible. Susan Avalon has nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, no way to escape what is coming. She sealed her own fate the moment she asked those 2 words. Which one? Which one? Those 2 words will haunt this case forever. Susan Avalon was so confident in her crimes, so detached from the reality of what she had done, that when detectives came to question her, she genuinely did not know which dead ex-husband they were asking about. Think about that for a moment. Let it sink in. She had killed 2 men in a single day, driven over 100 miles, shot them both multiple times, posed as a delivery driver, forced her way into a home, executed fathers in cold blood, left a teenager traumatized for life. And when it was over, she could not remember which murder the police had discovered. She had so much blood on her hands that she needed clarification. Which one? That is not the question an innocent person asks. That is not what someone says when they have nothing to hide. That is not how a normal human being responds when confronted by law enforcement. That is the question of a stone-cold killer who had committed so many crimes in a single day that she lost track of which one the cops knew about. She thought she was clever. She thought she had planned the perfect murders. She thought she could steal food from Panera and use it as a disguise. She thought she could wear a surgical mask and no one would recognize her. She thought she could drive across counties committing murders and then drive home and wash away the evidence with bleach. She was wrong about all of it. The surveillance cameras caught her at Panera. The license plate readers tracked her across 3 counties. The dying man in Bradenton named her with his final breaths. The forced entry at the Tampa home showed the violence of her intrusion. The bleach in her hands proved she knew she had something to hide, and her own words sealed her fate. Which one? That question will echo through the courtroom when she goes to trial. It will be played for the jury. It will be repeated by prosecutors in their closing arguments. It will be cited in sentencing hearings and appeals and motions for decades to come. It will be remembered by the families of the victims as proof that Susan Avalon felt no remorse, no guilt, no connection to the horror she had caused. She asked which one because to her they were not people. They were not human beings with families and dreams and the right to live their lives. They were not the fathers of her children. They were not men who had once loved her enough to marry her. They were problems to be eliminated, obstacles to be removed, enemies to be destroyed. And she removed them both on the same Wednesday afternoon in December. Now Susan Avalon faces the death penalty in Florida. She faces years in prison awaiting trial. She faces the judgment of 2 juries, 2 courts, 2 systems of justice that will decide whether she lives or dies for what she did. The evidence against her is overwhelming. The surveillance footage, the license plate readers, the dying declaration, the forced entry, the bleach, the shower, the derogatory comments about her victims. Her own words. Which one? There is no escape. There is no defense. There is no way to explain away what she did. 2 men are dead. A 15-year-old daughter lost her father and her mother in a single day. That teenager will never be the same. She will carry the trauma of hearing those gunshots for the rest of her life. She will grow up knowing that her mother murdered her father. 5 children are scattered across Florida trying to understand how mommy could do something so evil. Christmas 2025 was supposed to be a time of celebration. Instead, it was spent planning funerals and giving statements to police. Neighbors in Bradenton are haunted by the memory of a nice man who walked to the park every morning and will never walk again. His 2 dogs no longer have their owner. His family no longer has their father, their brother, their son. The Tampa victims' loved ones are grieving too. Another man dead. Another family destroyed. Another life cut short by Susan Avalon's bullets. There are no winners in this story. Only victims. Only loss. Only the hollow echo of gunshots in quiet neighborhoods on what should have been an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. Susan Avalon wanted to eliminate her problems. She wanted to end her child support obligations. She wanted revenge for years of custody battles and court hearings and bitter disputes. What she got instead was 2 dead ex-husbands, 5 traumatized children, and a one-way ticket to death row. Was it worth it? The $4,000 she owed in child support will never be paid now. The custody battles are over because there is no one left to fight over. The disputes have ended in the worst possible way. And Susan Avalon will spend the rest of her life in a prison cell, facing the possibility of execution, knowing that everyone in the world knows what she did. Which one? Both of them, Susan. Both of them. You killed them both. On the same day, in cold blood, with premeditation and planning and a complete absence of conscience. And now you will face justice for what you did. The state of Florida does not forgive. The state of Florida does not forget. And the state of Florida does not hesitate to pursue the ultimate punishment for those who commit the ultimate crime. Susan Avalon will stand trial. She will face a jury of her peers. She will hear the evidence against her read aloud in open court. She will see the surveillance footage from Panera Bread. She will hear her own words played back to her. Which one? And she will have to explain to 12 jurors why she killed 2 men on the same December afternoon. Rest in peace to the victims of this senseless tragedy. 2 men who did not deserve to die. 2 fathers who should have been there for their children. 2 lives cut short by a woman who could not let go of her hatred. If you want justice for these men, leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you are new here, subscribe to Crime Case Voices. Turn on notifications. We cover cases that need to be told. Stories that matter. Victims who deserve to be remembered. Until next time, stay safe out there.